Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's webinar. Today, Sentis and Mibo are joining forces to explore the topic of psychosocial risk. We'll hear from Dr. Amy Hawkes and Ben Carnell from Sentis, as well as Sean Fyfe from Mibo, to learn how we can move from fear and compliance to confidence and forward momentum with practical strategies to build a thriving safety culture. As we welcome attendees today from across our beautiful country and beyond, Sentis acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises their connection to land, waters and community. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, and we do this because we value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and knowledge. While we do have everyone on mute, please share your questions, reflections and ideas in our live chat, which you can open from the bottom of your meeting window. All questions will be answered during a Q&A period at the end of the session. Also, note that this session is being recorded and you will have an email with access to the session recording and the slides by tomorrow afternoon. And with that, I'll pass over to Ben to kick us off. Over to you, Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jazz, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. Before I jump into it, I did just pick up on a couple of comments there in the chat just around audio. So just before I continue, I might just get someone to respond that you can hear us okay, and we'll carry on. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kelvin. Welcome to today's webinar. Really excited. There's been a lot of conversation between Mibo and Sentis around this webinar and a lot of excitement around getting this webinar going. Really where this webinar came from, and we'll touch on the partnership between Sentis and Mibo in a moment, but really where this webinar came from is, we're in the fortunate position where we get to talk to lots of really good people and hear the sorts of things that they're doing in their organisation. Likewise, we're also in the privileged position of having a lot of data that comes through from our clients that we work with jointly together as well. And so really want to take the opportunity to do a bit of a webinar and have really just more of a conversational piece and to share some of those insights and some of those learnings. We'll have a bit of a conversation, almost a fireside chat with everyone here on the call listening along and share some of those insights, and we'll do our very best to finish on the hour, although knowing full well we could go until the sun goes down, but we will do our best. So in terms of, for those not familiar with Sentis or Mibo, we'll just do a quick overview of both of those organisations. So Sentis, some of you may be familiar with Sentis. I can see some familiar names here in the webinar. But you'll see on the next slide that for us as an organisation, we support organisations to create a positive experience for their people, particularly from a safety perspective within their organisations. There's three things that are important to us as an organisation. So the first one is to be a great place to work. We support organisations to do that, so we want to do that ourselves as well. Secondly is to support great work. So we're in the fortunate position of contributing a large portion of our profits back to land conservation adjacent to the Yirigi National Park. For those familiar with that, I can see some people from New South Wales. And that we're really proud of that work and that land conservation work that we've put into a place called Banyula down there. And then lastly is to do great work. And all of that great work is around how do we support organisations to change the lives of those individuals in those organisations for the better every day, but certainly those organisations themselves as well. We've been doing it for a little while, as you'll see here on the next slide. We've been doing it here for a little while with lots of different organisations around different pockets of the world. On the next slide there, sorry, Jazz, is you'll see some examples of the organisations that we've worked with. From everything from offshore oil and gas right through to through to healthcare and everything in between as well, with lots of different countries and locations around the world and languages as well. So really fortunate to work with those organisations and to hear from those organisations and for us as to learn from those organisations as well, and we can share those insights with other organisations as much. For us at Sentis and those organisations that we work with, part of what we do, as you'll see on the next slide, is we support them to create a positive safety culture. And what we're looking at through that positive safety culture lens is how do we in those organisations move beyond a compliance approach to safety and to actually look at how do we use safety to create that positive experience in the workplace, but to actually go above and beyond what we need to do to actually create a thriving workplace as well. And rather than seeing people as a problem or as a thing to be managed, but how do we actually see people as an enabler of what good safety, good performance looks like within an organization as well. In particular, the area that we focus is supporting organizations to create that positive safety experience for their people, from both the physical experience lens or more of that traditional safety lens, right through the psychological experience or the cognitive experience of work, as well as the social experience of work as well, and what those relationships look like between people as well. And then looking at, in terms of how people think about safety within their workplace, how do those three interact and support one another to create that positive safety experience where people can not just survive, but people actually can thrive within their workplaces from a safety point of view as well. Within that, psychosocial safety plays a really key part. Traditionally, there's been a strong focus on the physical safety aspect, but we've seen more and more over the last 10 years is how does organizations also start to look at the psychosocial aspect of safety and how that actually interacts with the physical environments that people operate in within as well. We look at that through a range of different levels, and so we look at that through in terms of creating that positive psychosocial experience for people. As we look at that through the individual level, the job level, the team level, leader level, as well as the systemic or organizational level as well. You can see there our definition around psychosocial safety, but certainly looking at how do we go beyond just the jobs to be done or the boxes to tick, the I's to dot, the T's to cross. Is what does it actually look like to go beyond that and really create not just a coping workplace, but where a positive workplace where people can really thrive in their workplace as well. We'll all be familiar, I'm sure, if you're jumping on the call today, you've got an interest in psychosocial, which is fantastic. We're all familiar with the psychosocial hazards, and so a lot of the work that we're doing with organisations, and we'll touch on that in a moment with Mibo, is really understanding these psychosocial hazards and the risks that sit alongside these within different organisations and how they either contribute to or certainly in some cases work against creating that positive safety experience that we want for our people in their workplace as well. Sean, I'll throw to you to maybe introduce a bit of Mibo and then we'll dovetail it in together.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Absolute pleasure. So I'll tell you a little about Mibo, and the reason I want to do that is because when you see the data insights that we talk about later, you'll understand how we get to that point and the data that we rely on and the systems that we rely on to get to those insights. So there's that significant rigor behind it. So Mibo is a next generation psychosocial risk management software. So we've become very, very well known for our risk management assessment approach that I think is broadly getting considered the gold standard now. But more than that, we integrate that psychosocial risk management approach into a broader software with Risk Register and lots of other features that come off that help you manage that whole process. So just a little bit about Mibo. Mibo was developed over many, many years, global collaboration with subject matter experts, academics, etc. Some three things that are really just important to kind of understand about Mibo. We've had a real focus on rigor, so trying to ensure that we can say to clients that what you are measuring, what you think you are measuring, you are indeed measuring, and that you can reliably remeasure. So we put a huge amount of effort into this. And in March this year, we actually underwent an independent academic assessment from a team at Griffith University here in Queensland. And it came out that Mibo is a very high quality instrument, high in validity and reliability. We also got some specific feedback as to how we could improve it and have embedded that into the tool. The other thing about Mibo is that we've made it very, very psychosocial specific, and we spent a long time doing that. Our aim has been able to manage the complexity so that you can get to this more simplified root cause prioritization. What are the upstream things that we need to focus on? And not just this linear approach to risk, not just you have demands, therefore it must cause harm. The things that we've really captured is the cumulative nature of harms and risks, the interrelated nature, protective factors, and so on. We've got a huge tech stack because we know that there's small teams really trying to run large-scale programs. So we've invested a huge amount of time and effort into producing an efficient and effective tech stack with high levels of granularity, customization, and flexibility. And we work now broadly across Australia, across 3 levels of government, across large enterprises in Australia, and also now globally with large partners, including Rolls-Royce. If we flick to the next slide, then just to talk a little bit about the psychosocial risk assessment, what we developed, it's a smart survey system, so it actually listens to the answers in real times to classify people's experience or exposure to the hazard, and then conducts the risk assessment based on how it's actually impacting people. So just because someone has high cognitive demands doesn't mean it needs to impact. We have a complete hazard profile. You get that full data set across 24 factors, additional things like productivity hindrances and counterproductive workplace behaviors, work climate like psychosocial safety climate, work outcomes, psychosocial stress related outcomes, and financial measures of those, the inbuilt risk assessment via our risk protective analysis. So we actually capture real insights of people, not just trying to use this kind of linear approach and assuming risk. And we probably become very, very well known for our ability to now understand the interrelated nature of work, which we're going to present, of those work factors, which we'll present for you later. And importantly, the protective factors and how we measure protective factors. Something else that we're very kind of well known for as well is the way we trigger follow-up questions. So we capture the extra detail on the nature and source of harmful behaviors, so that if you're in healthcare, you can actually understand, is it happening within our workforce, or is it actually happening with patient customer interactions? Is it happening on external engagements with external stakeholders, or is it happening internally within management? So very much those nature and source follow-ups are proving extremely beneficial. So that's a little bit about the psychosocial risk assessment. And if we move on to the next slide, that's just an example of the heat mapping that we use, but we have these large, high-quality data sets. And what we've been able to do is build world-first machine learning models that actually analyzes the harm and the benefit relationships of these work factors from a causative relationship and not just from a correlative. And that allows us to really understand upstream or root cause problems, and to help organizations focus on those areas. And we'll give you lots of insights coming up later. So that's a little bit of the overview of Mibo, and I'll throw you back to Ben and Amy now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sean. So in terms of Sentis and Mibo, we've been partnering together now for a couple of years. I think conversations, I know, Sean, you and I met probably about four and a bit years ago, and
That's right.
started talking about lots of things, mostly sport to begin with, but yeah, certainly then found our mutual keen interest in what psychosocial safety looks like through those conversations, and likewise Amy getting involved, and Anthony and lots of different people from both sides is it became clear that there was a really strong alignment in terms of the lens that we looked through when we spoke about and when we talked about psychosocial safety, and that was really around how do we look at psychosocial not just as a box to tick, or as I's to dot and T's to cross. Yes, that's part of it, but what does it actually look like to use psychosocial safety in terms of enabling that really strong, thriving workplace as well? And so the more we started to explore what psychosocial safety looks like, and share insights and share learnings, the more we could see that alignment in probably underlying philosophy, but also values in terms of how we approach psychosocial safety. One of the big things that jumped out through those conversations as we formed that partnership and began doing, different or working together with different client engagements, is a really, really strong drive, passion around making sure that we understand clearly the job that needs to be done, and that comes through the data that we have at hand. What we've seen, what we're seeing in lots of different organizations is, organizations that are really good at doing stuff or rolling stuff out, or, sometimes it might be a wellbeing initiative, or it might be something in the psychosocial space. But there's not always that clear understanding in terms of, well, what's the thing that's actually trying to be solved? And so where we started to discuss it between Mibo and Sentis is looking at, well, how can we partner, where can we bring our mutual strengths together to partner with organizations to really help them understand the problem that they need to be solving, and more so, what are the underlying problems, the problems that are harder to see that's driving what we might be seeing as well, which we'll get into in a moment. So what that looks like, and here on just this page here, is we've brought together an example pathway in terms of how we've partnered together with a few different organisations now. So generally what we do at the start in stage one, and we'll touch on the importance of this at the moment, although I know I'm singing to the choir on this call here as well, is making sure that executive really understand what psychosocial safety is, their role in psychosocial safety is, and the cost of doing nothing, but also the value of doing something to target psychosocial safety as well. So really making sure that executive have got skin in the game from the get-go. Often what we're seeing is then a lot of boards getting involved in that conversation. We're actually seeing that more and more, which is really important. But then jumping into stage two, one of the things we know is that lots of organizations, they have a lot of data already. Organizations are really good generally at collecting data. And so we want to actually understand that data to begin with, is really look at, well, before we jump into then collecting more data, let's understand what we've got. Let's understand some of the themes. That might be exit survey data, it might be different, claim data, it might be range of different, it might be different, engagement survey data, really looking at what's that data that's available and what does that data tell us from the get-go, and then what gaps need to be addressed to help us better understand what might be happening. From there, what we often do is then partner with Mibo, and so Mibo's assessment will be deployed within that organization. And again, we'll touch on the insights, but really understanding, what are the presence of those different hazards or risks more so, but also then what are the protective or the harm factors that sit alongside those risks as well. From there, one of the strengths that we're seeing, we'll touch on this as well in a moment, is then doing focus groups. Is go, well, now that we've got that data, either from existing data, but usually more so that assessment from Mibo's, well, how do we unpack and really understand why we're seeing some of that data come through? Often, the way I describe it to organizations is quantitative data is really good at giving the what might be happening and starts to touch on the how and why, but really getting underneath the surface and really trying to understand, through talking to people and challenging and prompting some of those conversations, we start to understand why those things might be happening as well. The triangulation of those two data points, the quantitative data through the assessment, but then also starting to capture some of that verbatim data through the focus groups that we'll do, is then being in a position to then report those results back. And then we've seen a lot of organizations have all of this data, but struggle to actually take that data and move those insights into an action plan, is in supporting that organization to pull that together in a one-page plan or in some sort of strategy plan as well. To then take that data and of all the dials that we can turn up and down, which ones do we need to address most critically based on the recommendations, and then starting to implement, which then together Mibo and Sentis will support the organisation with what those initiatives might look like. And that column can be a very, very long column, tailored to each organisation from your risk registers right through to, what training or upskilling development policy changes might be needed as well. So that's a little bit of what it can typically look like. Obviously, that journey is slightly tailored for each organisation based on what they've done so far. But we're really proud, and I guess there's a lot of reward that comes for us as individuals. Partner with organisations where we see them go on this journey and be able to really understand the problem that needs to be solved, and then be in a better position to actually properly put something in practice to address those challenges as well. So we're going to kick off really just sharing some of the insights. As I mentioned, we're going to share some of the insights we've learned with different organisations through that data. Mibo have got a really, really cool platform where they're able to pull out some of those insights. Likewise, we've got a heap of verbatim data that we're able to extract some learnings from as well and share some of those insights that, hopefully there's a few gold nuggets you can take away from today as well. But I might, Amy, if it's all right, I might throw to yourself for maybe a first question. And that is, so what do we see? We work with lots of different organizations, lots of different levels within those organizations, different industries, different locations. What do we see as the most common concerns regarding psychosocial safety? When that conversation pops up, generally it's an internal conversation. What do we see as the most common concerns, or what have you seen so far, Amy?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thank you, Sean, for joining us today, and thanks everyone for joining us online. I think one of the really common concerns at the very beginning of this process for people is, gosh, this seems like a lot to get across, and there's that sort of sense, I think, of a bit of overwhelm in terms of how many different factors there are. We also see a little bit of a bit of pushback in terms of maybe this is just a bit of people whinging. Maybe people need to toughen up a bit and just get used to things being this way. And they sometimes we also hear, people don't realize how good they've really got it. So you hear a whole range of different things like that at the very beginning of that psychosocial exploration. And I think part of that is because when we talk about physical safety and physical hazards, it's quite an obvious thing that we can look at. If someone was to fall off your roof, you're probably going to expect that they're going to get injured. And if somebody's wearing the right harness and equipment, it's kind of obvious that they've got the right gear on and they're less likely to get hurt. When we talk about psychosocial safety, the build-up of the hazard and the build-up of the harm is often much slower, much more over time, and is quite variable amongst individuals as well. And so it makes it a harder thing to observe that the harm might be there and that the harm might be occurring for people. And it actually is a little bit harder to notice when controls are present or when they're lacking. And that's one of the reasons that I think I really enjoy taking organizations and leaders through the Mibo results and the Mibo story, because it gives the full picture of what's going on for people. In terms of other sorts of concerns, and Sean, please jump in and join me as well. I think that we often hear people say, like, this is just going to open up a big can of worms. I don't want to go there. Even things like, we're not going to be able to deal with all of this, so do we even want to ask these questions? And there's a lot of pressure, I think, on leaders to respond if they go and collect this data. And that's something that I know, Sean, you and I have talked about, how important it is for people to slow down and realize that it's really about getting the data so that you can then get a plan. You don't have to action everything straight away, but that plan really helps you get things moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we find. It's probably at an executive level that they get quite fearful of what the data may say, and then what that leads to is almost like a bit of deer in headlights, a little bit of helplessness, and that's pretty typical kind of human reaction for when there's fear, you can get helplessness. And I think that's sometimes a really misunderstood place in terms of where the liability lies as well. So it's okay to have data that's not perfect. You don't have to fix everything straight away. It's actually about understanding what's going on and then prioritizing in a way that is reasonably practicable for your organization. So I think communicating that up to executive is kind of something that's really, really important. We're spending a lot of time, and also trying to produce a lot of data that helps executives kind of understand the process better as well. And where that kind of comes in is understanding, helping them understand where the upstream, the capability of acting on upstream factors and how that can influence data sets really broadly. So I think that's probably one of the things, one of the concerns that we see that kind of inhibits or blocks best practice programs being implemented, is that kind of fear at that level and go, what are we going to find? Is that going to create a liability for us? And it's like, well, it's actually the process that you're being asked to go through is that process of continual improvement. And you have to be able to tick off and do things at any one time. The other thing that I also think is really important is that it's actually what you don't want to do is try and fix everything at one time, right? Because sometimes the more you try and do, the less cut through on the important things you have. So we spent a long time just talking about, look, you need to try and find your priority areas and really focus on those, because that may even involve a little bit of change and you don't want to start introducing so much other change. So find those key priority areas, use your data well, and you're never going to have a liability from finding out. It's about not going through the process. So that's the biggest kind of concern or blocker that I see for organizations really be able to push forwards with good momentum on these programs.
Yeah,
Yeah, you certainly see that a lot in talk to executive groups. Often not our stakeholders, whether that might be your safety manager or people and culture manager, or ideally both. Not necessarily in the stakeholders there, but certainly at that executive level, you see that pushback around. Well, if we start going and rolling out, the surveys or focus groups, or we start trying to gather the data, then we're going to unearth the problem that's there, and then we're going to have to do something about it. And there's
Then
probably a worry that how big are problems, or how many of those problems, that they're going to be. And I think that, it's a bit of a head in the sand sort of thing to kind of go, well, if we just ignore and don't measure, then there's nothing there for us to fix. But the storms coming through Brisbane yesterday, whether you check the radar or not, they were still coming through. And so it's
And Ben,
already,
I think maybe just on that point as well, I find a really important point is that, is that where the liability, it's not what you did know, it's what you ought to have known. And that's where
yes,
your
yeah,
liability is. And that's a really kind of really kind
yeah.
of important piece. And on a final thing that we've been trying to do a lot of is actually to show that good is really possible. So we're working with so many different organizations now, and we can actually see that there's some actually organizations out there doing, even when they do their first risk assessment, they're already doing an amazing job. They've got great data, super low risk, protective factors through the roof. We do our risk protective ratio. And then, so it also in response to your first thing that you said, Amy, is that, sometimes, it's going to be people whinging and stuff. It's like, well, why aren't there people whinging so much in these other organizations that are doing it really well? So it actually is, it is really possible to do a great job. So we've started actually trying to share de-identify data of organizations that are, and show that there are organizations, it is very doable and you can do it and you can have great data and low risk. Even if there are some hazards and demands, it doesn't mean the harm has to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Sean. We've got a really good
Mm.
comment in the chat around a potential concern is the idea that you manufacture complaints by telling people about the hazards. So,
Mm.
that by increasing awareness amongst our people, we're going to increase complaints. So, it is a question that gets asked at that
Mm.
executive level. Do we really want to be going down this path? And I think, Ben, you've got a great analogy there with the storm. The reality is that these things are impacting people. They might not have a name for it. They might not know how to speak up about it, but they're still there and they're impacting people. And by becoming more aware of these things, we can start to take some better actions, which I actually think flows on quite nicely to our next question, in terms of how we can help people look at some of these results and make sure they are received in a helpful way and make sure that people don't feel like it's manufacturing complaints amongst the workforce by talking about this sort of stuff. Sean, Ben, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think I can jump in to kick us off with is I think it's an interesting one around that manufacturer complaints by helping people be informed. Um, my initial response as I saw that pop up would be no, it wouldn't. As I reflected more and go, yeah, it possibly could, but I think to your point just there, Amy, is that those whether the complaints are coming through or not, those challenges are still there, and so if education is informing people, so I think one of the benefits of making sure that people understand the psychosocial hazards at all levels is that they can understand how they impact their roles, and so. We go back to what we had at the start there around, job, individual, team, organization, leader, is that education piece that allows people to be better informed around things that they can do at those different levels, to manage their job. So if I am an individual worker and I am, let's say I'm out there, I'm working for a company and I'm installing solar panels and I'm working, in isolation, let's say on this particular job, that understanding of that as a psychosocial risk, particularly if I'm doing that repeatedly, that understanding of that better positions me to look at, well, what are the things that I can take control of and I can do in terms of how I manage my own individual workload, or what conversations might I have with my leader or with my team or with the organization to help me better actually manage that psychosocial risk within my own workplace. Where if I don't understand that that's a thing, I think the individual's not necessarily in the best position, or certainly not in the best position to be able to manage that psychosocial hazards or risks rather within their role as well. And I think, and we'll touch on this in a moment. I think that's where you'll probably start to see, without that education at all levels, is that's where people will start to actually probably attribute, their frustrations or their concerns actually to other things that are playing out in their role, and we miss that opportunity to actually understand the real driving aspect of what's contributing to that person's psychological health and well-being as well.
Yeah, I'd have on that note. I think what's sometimes, if you sometimes it can be looked at in the negative. too much. So if someone does have some high demands, but they're aware of the different hazards in their environment, and it comes out in maybe the data that their role clarity is not that great, and then there's that information coming to the individual or the manager of teams that, well, hang on, I can help people manage their demands and be harmed less or risk to harm less by actually just improving their role clarity to some degree. So it's actually being aware of the positive things as well, not just all the things that would necessarily get people to whinge. It's actually trying to get them to be aware of, hey, if I can still work hard and be under demands if I've got great job control, if I'm got a good sense of fairness in my organization and I've got good role clarity. So it's trying to look at those positive things as well, and we'll talk about some of those insights later. And then the other thing that I think that's really important in that space is to then try and tie in and use some data to show the cost of it. And I think that's going to be something that's more important, that to say, well, you might be opening up a can of worms, okay, if that's what you think that's happening, but not doing that, you can actually show that there's a huge cost associated with it. So I think that's something that's really, really important to show as well. I think we've gone to the next slide, but Amber, you might have something to say before we get onto those next bits of Mibo research.
Yep, no, talk to this, Sean. I think you're on a roll. Let's talk about
sure.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Well, we've just got some key pieces of research there. Might be saying, well, if you're looking at some of your harmful behaviors, we've just released some recent research that actually shows that individuals will report high or very high harm from bullying or harassment unless they also report high or very high harm from at least one other upstream factor, less than 1%. So what it's saying is that if you have individuals or employees in your organization, and if they are not reporting high or very high harms from other upstream organizational factors, then it's less than a 1% chance that they will report high or very high harms from bullying and harassment. So you can absolutely have a big impact on those exposures and the harm from potentially harmful behaviors by taking effective action on those root cause prioritization upstream factors, things like change management, things like procedural fairness. And the reason we did this piece of research is that there's a lot of attention on those harmful behaviors like bullying and harassment in the workers' compensation data. And so we've unpacked as to the system that creates such a one kind of cause association with, say, psych injuries, for example. But in reality, it's actually much more complicated than that. So we think that's a really, really important piece of research to get out there. Yeah. And maybe, yeah.
I was going to say one of the interesting things about this, and in the broader psychosocial space, is I think a lot of the data points that we can see come through, or some of the data points, not necessarily a lot of the data points, rather, will point to a particular issue, but it's important to actually unpack to go, well, is that the thing that needs to be solved? Is that the problem that needs to be addressed? And so, I look at data like this, Sean, I think we were talking about a few weeks ago that you might have data where bullying comes through quite high. Now, certainly, we don't want bullying to be happening in workplaces, and certainly it's a thing that needs to be addressed. But bullying as a psychosocial hazard is, for a lot of people, going back to their awareness piece, it's one of the ones that's probably a little bit easier to define, at an individual level. And so that's where it can come through, sometimes as being higher. And certainly we want to address it. So I'm not dismissing that it needs to be addressed, but I think that importance of going, well, what else actually might be happening there that's actually driving, and that feeling of where someone doesn't feel right in their role, and they're pointing it to bullying because it's probably a little bit more of a contained definition in some ways compared to the others. It's that importance of going, well, what's the data tell us, but also, what other data points are pointing to what actually might be driving that at an underlying level.
Yeah, I think the research also backs you up on that, Sean, too. There was a meta-analysis on bullying, and those upstream organizational factors were found to be very highly related to the presence of bullying. So it does give us a target on something that we might be able to improve in the way work is designed, and hopefully see that flow on effect to improved outcomes in terms of behavior at work too.
Yeah, and also we've got organizations that we work with where they've actually been able to trace through with the combination of their quantitative and qualitative data, and actually be able to trace through to some of those root causes. So, it might be the fact that and we see it. There's a piece of the organizational justice or fairness piece they've been able to identify, and that's actually their prioritization, is actually fixing that thing, and then they're going to then remeasure the primary risk that they're actually trying to, or the primary factor they're trying to have influence on, the secondary and then the secondary factors that they're also. So, for example, that fairness piece, its relationship to driving higher incivility if you don't have a good sense of fairness, and then increasing in the harmful behaviors. And we can show that clearly in the data. And I've got a slide maybe coming up later, but we can certainly share that at another time. But yeah, and so if we're trying to think about that root cause prioritization, yes, it might make people aware, but it allows you to unpack and get to the root causes. Why are people, why would someone even want to then say, for example, manufacture it? They're obviously under some distress, and it's about getting to the root causes as to why. And this next bit of research, I think, is a really key piece as well. So we have what we call our risk protective ratio at Mibo, and what that is the balance basically between the cumulative stresses or potential risks and harm versus the cumulative supports that or protective factors that people are reporting in their organization, and we ratio that. So the higher the ratio means that people are in an organization where they're feeling much more supported than they are stressed, and that ratio goes up. And then we've been able to show that correlates really, really well with other constructs, and we've done a lot of research on to show the accuracy of it. But what we also do at Mibo is have our psychosocial stress work specific outcomes, where we have a salary banded question and we ask questions that relate specifically to the turnover intent, specifically due to work stress, and have research of how we do the calculations, absenteeism, presenteeism, or loss of productivity when you're actually at work, and productivity hindrances. And we do financial calculations of the outcomes of this. And we're able to show that this risk protective ratio strongly correlates with the cost. So it basically says that if you can increase the supports for your people, decrease the stresses, you're going to have a much more productive workforce. Now, we can actually show, if you have a look at that bar graph there, that we can show that the organizations that are in the very high, above 1, that they're actually showing you're never going to have a fully productive, kind of salary proportion, but we can show that they're often under 20%. Now, if you go right to the other end, now this is also organizations, but also looking at groups within organizations, we can see some organizations or groups that their people are actually reporting that there is a loss of over 50% of the productive portion of their salary. So it's huge costs. All right. And we can basically show that if you improve that ratio, you will decrease your costs. And then we've got some examples that we've done some extrapolations on those calculations. We've got organizations, with thousands and thousands of employees and smaller ones. But if you look at an organization with 1,000 employees and you have a look at the difference between someone having a very high risk protective ratio compared to a very low, the cost in terms of productivity outcomes or work stress related work outcomes is huge. So I think that's a really important way to try and get executive buy-in to say we can actually make a big financial difference to our organization by doing a great job in this space. And if there's data that we don't think that's great, then if we are effective in taking action, we are actually going to improve the financial outcomes for our business as well. So I think that's a really kind of important piece to get buy-in as well.
I think these data points are really, really important in terms of, what does it look like to come back to the question, to ensure that that message is received well, or those results are received well, is talking to some of these stats. Because, I was talking to an organization last week actually where, part of their workforce, is out there in the field doing high risk activities. And then they've got a large portion of their workforce that are, more in a corporate office based environment. And as we sort of spoke through the jobs to be done with that organization as a whole, from a broader cultural point of view, there's a quick response to, well, we're not going to target the corporate part because, the high risk work's done out in the field. And so that's where our LTIs are happening. And so from a cost to us as a business or impact to us as a business, that's where the real impact is happening. And so, these sorts of, that perception is presumably held at different levels within that organization. So being able to unpack, data like this and going, well, yeah, sure, the outcome from, an incident might look a little bit different, and certainly it can look, we know the extreme of what it can look like, but really being able to understand this in terms of, well, what's the impact to the organization, from a productivity point of view, but from a cultural point of view, to the people as well within that organization, I think is really important.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if we can set the expectations early that, this process is going to identify some of our protective factors, the things we're doing well, and it will identify some areas that we need to give a bit more attention to, and that the focus is really around improving the way work is designed, and it's not around blaming an individual. And if you can connect it back to some of your values or the things that the organization sees as a priority in terms of safety or in terms of engagement, then it can actually fit well under other strategies that already exist, and it doesn't need to sit out on its own. So that's probably my tip in terms of getting the results out there and helping people understand why it's a useful thing to focus on. I think the stats you've just shared, Sean, are a fantastic story to be told as well. In terms of the value of combining an assessment like Mibo with focus groups, as Ben outlined at the beginning, that is part of the process that we would recommend. And we see so much value out of doing this. The Mibo tool has a lot of benefits in the way that it, as Sean said, has that smart assessment of the actual harm that's going on for people in the moment that they're answering the survey. So you get a depth and richness to the detail from the Mibo dashboard. And then the focus groups, I think, really help bring some of that to light in terms of the stories that people tell about the way that work is done and the way that it's organized, and it really helps refine your focus of your next steps and your action planning as well.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, I've had some great experiences lately with organisations with the focus group and that qualitative part coming up, that if you've got that great data going into your focus groups, you can be so well planned in terms of what you want to explore. If you've got a group, the likely patterns that are actually, and you'll see some of the insights later, the likely patterns that are probably present. And so it can really become about the trying to get to the detail of your control designs and what you can actually do, because you've got a great understanding of the patterns of those data already. And so just great examples of those organizations that have been able to really kind of narrow in on those things, whether it's the way work is distributed, that's a sense of kind of unfairness, or what those productivity hindrances are. So identifying those barriers to effective work that you're going to try and actually remove to help manage job demands. It's going in well prepared and having a really good understanding of the data and the potential patterns that are probably going on. It really helps you get the most out of your focus groups. So you finish your focus groups by stuff that's really actionable and tangible for an organization to deliver.
I think the other part of those focus groups as well is it really allows us and leaders within organisations to be able to test assumptions being made with that data as well. It's really easy to make we get the data points and sort of draw the linkages and go, well, that must be what's happening. But to be able to really sort of actually, well, let's really pressure test our thinking. We know that at an executive level, they're only aware of 4% of the challenges that are happening at a frontline level. And so being able to get this data and go, well, what does that mean? I think even to a conversation earlier on this morning I was in with some people is a data point going, hey, the organization or this team doesn't feel like they're getting the right information coming or getting enough information coming through, and the response to that was, well, we feel like we've been pushing information more and more. So, we can just keep going down that pathway. It doesn't actually change, the experience of those people who are actually going, well, actually, let's actually unpack it in some focus groups or some conversations to go, well, what are we getting wrong? What are we missing? What information isn't going through, and being able to actually unpack that with those people as well is where we can really, really properly understand the job to be done.
Yep.
Yeah. I think for me, it also really helps highlight, some of the results that might be coming through. So some of the insights that we've had include, we might have found out in the Mibo survey that there was a really high risk of isolation, remote work, and then the harm that's being done in the Mibo assessment is it's not really a lot of harm going on there. And so it's an interesting thing to explore and find out, well, this is a big part of the way the work is being done. What are the things that are protecting against that harm? And the organization had an amazing array of controls that were already in place for the fact that people were working quite remotely. They had great tracking, they had great support from their management. But there was also an individual factor in that people really enjoyed that part of their work. They liked the solitude, they liked the quiet time. And so, even though it came out on an initial assessment of the presence of some hazards as being there, it wasn't a major problem for the people who were doing the work because the controls were there and because it fit them well in their individual preferences for work too. So it really helped shape our understanding of this particular hazard for this organization and the way that it was being controlled and managed. So I think the sort of data you can get out of focus groups really do give you some great insights as well.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point, Amy, is the separating off that, just because the hazard there doesn't have to be causing harm. And we've had a few instances recently where we've had, organizations been really pleasantly surprised where the data has come in and been really, it's actually, the data's come back and shown what great impact the things they're already doing are having for their people. So there was a big reinforcement of the things that they're doing. And it was also a great reminder that, hey, you've got to try and keep doing these things. Be aware of what you're doing, and you've got to have a priority of continuing to do those things and not lose focus because they're working really effectively for your people.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. I know there's been a range of other factors and insights and things that we've learned as well, Sean. We often talk about the interaction between different components of workplace hazards and the protective factors that exist there. And I know you've got some really, really cool data that you've been playing with through some interesting regressions and causal analyses and things like that. So you're going to take us through.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got, we can move on to the next slide there because we'll look at the job demands loop. So some of this is related to job demands, but we're doing some really interesting things across a number of different areas like, drivers of incivility and relationships to harmful behaviors and protection for, if people are exposed to trauma and things like that. So this is in relation to some of the job demands we've been presenting and trying to really kind of spread the word. The first thing, so we collect productivity hindrances, and that's been like an absolutely critical piece to add in. And so many organizations are using productivity hindrances. Or maybe if we just go back up, we'll come back down to the productivity hindrances in a sec. And what we notice is that those 4 areas of work design that we capture, or job demands, we have it in our work design category, emotional demands, cognitive demands, work overload, the harm from those really tend to move together. But we also know that productivity hindrances has a really big causal impact on those 3 elements of job demands that we see so commonly, and that come out as very much emotional and demand and cognitive demands, and productivity hindrances in particular, workload overload, maybe just down slightly. That come out as the biggest harms. And that's also a great one to say it's not always about the amount of work with job demands, and people get focused on the amount of work. It's actually not about that much, not necessarily about that in so many cases that we're seeing. So the productivity hindrances, identifying those things that are presenting barriers to effective work, unnecessary meetings, what communication channels are not working, the ineffective work systems, and we capture those sources. So the take-home message there is really trying to understand your productivity hindrances, because we see so many organizations now being able to effectively start to manage job demands with things that are actually really actionable, and it takes the fear out of, oh, it's just about workload. Yeah. So on the next slide, we've done the study on the productivity hindrances. And how it actually, if you decrease your productivity hindrances, how it will decrease harm from your job demands. But interestingly, if we take the data one step further, that we know that increased harm from job demands, cognitive, work overload, emotional demands, increases incivility in your workplace. It absolutely increases your incivility from a causal perspective, not just correlative. And then both the increase in civility, but also a direct line to most of your harmful behaviors. So basically a two-pronged causal kind of relationship to decrease your harmful behaviors. So it's saying that if you can decrease the barriers to effective work and therefore decrease your productivity hindrances, you'll have good impact on your decreasing harm from your job demands, and you'll also have that downstream influence on decreasing incivility and decreasing your harmful behaviors. So I think that's something that's, every organization can go in and do that and understand their data and then go and remeasure accurately. And that's the key point. So if you've made it your point where you want to go and actually, do some things in and around productivity hindrances that you've identified, then measure broadly. And then you can actually show, and from a compliance perspective, you can document your rationale and why you've taken that approach. And then you can show in time, once you feel like there's productivity hindrances that have been identified and had time to have impact, you can remeasure. And then on the next group, we've spoken already. The next slide, we've already spoken about the job demands and how it's not always just about the amount of work that's being done. We've done some great analysis with our machine learning models that we've developed that I spoke about previously to identify what are the strongest protective factors across job demands. And when I say job demands, I'm looking at those four things. So it's saying that if you're in an organization or you have a group where you've got some high harms from those job demands coming out, and it's likely then that you probably don't have great scores in your role clarity. And we can now start to have a look at what, and say, oh, well, if you're getting under this level for role clarity, that's not great. So you really want to be up in this area to be mitigating those harms. You should absolutely be looking at your role clarity if you're going to try and look at operating on some protective factors. It might be the case that you're not in a position to actually remove kind of the amount of work. All right, we've identified some productivity issues. Now we're going to really strengthen these protective factors. The 5 things that you need to have a look at are your role clarity. What's your role clarity score doing? What's your sense of procedural fairness or organizational justice? If that is low and not as strong as what as recommended, then you should absolutely look at trying to identify why that's the case, improving that, and that will have an impact on your harm from your job demands. Manager or direct leader support, reward and recognition, equipment and systems, which we know has a big tie into your productivity hindrances. So it's just being able to open up and understand that there's all these levers in and around your job demands that you can actually pull to have impact on your job demands. And it's not just about the amount of work. So they're just some of the insights that we've been able to deliver off those machine learning models and our larger data sets, the larger de-identified data sets that we thought that when we talk to people, it's actually kind of really meaningful, kind of like helpful to actually then think, hey, I can actually approach job demands now with some levers to pull and influence and understand.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. Just all the points made there, Sean, but that last point there around what are the levers we can pull. And you touched just on the next slide there, Jazz. Is often feeding this back to executive groups or the stakeholder groups is it's an organization or stakeholders can often be in that position to go, workload's a challenge. So we've got to shift what that looks like, and the response from other stakeholders internally within an organization might be, well, we can't do that, or there'll be some frames that be pushed back around, how unrealistic or how unfair people are judging that workload. But to be able to actually tell that story within the data to go, well, that might be the thing, but actually what we know from this broader data set, is that what we're seeing here is likely to be contributed by these things here. And if we can address these things here, that's going to be the flow and effect. And then we talk about the benefits to the organization as well, which is a stronger, I think, more compelling story rather than we've got a workload issue, which is often met with a bit of resistance at the more senior levels.
Yeah. And then be able to show them some data as well. That's, we have data sets there that show, organizations with similar in the same ballpark of the demands level that people are reporting, but quite different levels of risk or harm being reported. And then we can trace it back to those other protective factors. Yep. So being able to tell some of those stories is really key.
Yeah. And I'd recommend just spending the time to really get to know the results. That takes a bit of time to understand the story that exists in these results. And I think the organizations and the people in culture and the safety managers that we've worked with that have really done this well have really spent the time to ask a lot of questions of the results and unpack them and understand the experience behind them, get the story really clear, get a plan really clear, and then simplifying that down to communicate it out to people, I think has been something I've seen work really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And very much to that point there, Amy, as you've just touched on there, is the data points in isolation, I think, can seem big. They can seem really challenging. They can raise more questions than necessarily the questions it answers. And I think being able to step back and go, well, what story is this data trying to tell? No individual data point, is something we want to base a whole strategy or a whole plan on, is, being able to tell that story with that data, to really look at, well, what is the job that needs to be done in order to shift what this looks like for us as well. Amy, Sean, is there anything else you could throw into this point? Yeah, as well before we wrap up for
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, from that one, I think, you can look at it, those big complex hazards. I mean, I think if you're just coming back and saying, look, we've just got this, this continual improvement mindset, um, and I mean, I just think that's the key point in some of those. It's like, okay, what are those simple things we can start working on now? All right, and yes, and that's just going to be, we're starting to chisel. Even if we've got some data that's we don't think's overly favourable, what are we going to start to do with the resources that we've got and start to chisel away at improving some simple things and communicating to your employees the fact that you've actually listened to them and done that. That in itself will increase probably the level of psychological safety, which will in
you.
turn have a kind of snowballing effect, right? So just not is trying to actually just think, you know what, we're on this journey of continual improvement. We're going to actually start by just trying to identify those key areas that we think are those upstream things for us to actually start working on. Then we're going to remeasure. All right. And then we're going to chisel off the next bit that we're going to continue to try and work on. So I think that continual approach to improvement, and maybe just, in the sport terms, marginal gains, where you're thinking if we can improve 1% here, 2% here, 1% here, 2% here, and it all starts to snowball. So yeah, that would be my kind of like, 2 cents on that area.
Which is a great way of describing, Sean, exactly what organisations are being asked to do.
Yeah.
As well as it's, this. Well, if we know all the problems, we have to solve all the problems. That's not what organisations are being asked to do. Organisations are being asked to asked to understand what their psychosocial landscape looks like, and show that they've got steps in place to go through the process of addressing those and reevaluating, continue to evolve what that looks like as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, we can all talk the leg off an iron pot. So I'll probably some key takeaways here that we'll touch on. Amy, if you want to touch on this slide, then we might wrap it up for the day.
Yeah, I think the way you just summarized it then, Sean, having a continuous improvement mindset is great. Thinking about the journey we want to take people on, thinking about the protective factors that we have in place, and really saying that this is an important part of who we are in our organization, that it's part of our culture, it's part of our work design. So let's get it right and work together. So I think on the next slide, Jazz, we got some extra information for people if they'd like to learn a little bit more. Thanks.
Absolutely. So there on the screen, you can see a website to go and check out some more information on psychosocial safety through Sentis. I will drop that link in the chat momentarily. On that page, you can also click that button that says talk to us today, and we'll get in touch to talk about psychosocial safety in your organisation. Now, the time has come to go through some questions. There is one question that we have in chat at the moment. I'll throw this one to you guys. The question is from Chris Bradley. Can you provide any insights as to the pre-employment medical requirements, either in place or in the works, relating to identifying mental health conditions in prospective employees? An interesting question. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a go at that, Amy, or do you want me to have a go?
I probably first advice is to think about getting some legal advice on a question like that rather than trusting me. Second suggestion, I've seen in a number of job ads that actually explicitly state the type of individual resilience or the sorts of content you might be exposed to in this particular job as a very forward way of being upfront about what to expect. And I think that's a really important part of recruiting people, is to set the right expectations, but you can't put people in a situation like that without providing the right supports. So legally, it's, we need to make sure that we've got the right supports in place. So I would probably say it's multi-factor approach would be my recommendation there. Be upfront about what's expected, have good selection processes, but also have really good controls and supports in place. Yeah. Sean, do you have anything extra?
Yeah. I think you've said it all, Amy. I think it's just part, I mean, that in itself, your recruitment process and trying to get good role fit for people is obviously an important control in itself. So I mean, I know there's tools out there that can really help you do that as well. So it'll be looking at implementing those controls, and it might be for a particular role. And then what you're aiming to do is then, if you've got that control in for a period of time, where you're trying to match those people to those roles, then you're going to be able to measure over time the influence that they have as to whether or not, you might have a situation where people are still exposed to trauma in the role, but you feel like that control, because you're getting better role fit for people, the actual harm in relation to that exposure to trauma, maybe it's first responders, that is actually is less because there's better role fit for people. So yeah.
Yeah. Lovely. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah.
Fantastic. I don't think there are any other questions, Jess. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
And that concludes our
Thank
session on
you very much.
psychosocial risk, from fear to forward momentum. Massive thank you to our panelists and to everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, when you exit Zoom, a feedback form will pop up. We do ask that you please take a minute to let us know your thoughts on today's session, as well as what topics you would like to hear more about. Have a fantastic day, stay safe over the holiday season, and we look forward to catching up with you again in our next series of webinars that will kick off in the new year.